Miss Sanaa, we are live. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. If you were here with us yesterday, you already know that this is not an ordinary gathering. And if you were joining us for the first time today, welcome. You have arrived at exactly the right moment. We are here under the platform of Women Extension, a global nonprofit organization present in 134 countries, operating across every continent, offering every single program it runs completely free of charge and fully remotely. Because Women Extension was built on one foundational belief, and that was to uh, empower communities, individuals across the board. Since 2021, Women Extension has trained over 20,500 women in vocational and technical skills, elevated more than 3,000 women into community leadership, and awarded over 18 scholarships for bachelor's, master's, and PhD programs, and mentored more than 30 women entrepreneurs with real resources and real pathways to growth. Guided by the idea of khidmat, that means the principle of service to humanity, of giving back to the community, the entire organization runs on volunteer basis. No one here is doing anything for a paycheck. They are doing it because they believe in a more equitable world. They believe and that it is necessary and it can be achieved. The flagship 1 million leaders program by 2030 is already building the next generation of leaders and women who will not wait to be invited into governance and policy. They are being prepared to walk into those rooms and reshape them. And their fellowships that have been running for the past 2 years are also a proof of that impact that is being created. With with every year, some new programs being added that keeps in view what are the different things that are needed. So the conference is part of this mission, and today we take it a step further. I want to begin by asking you something. When was the last time you witnessed something unfair and you felt it land in your chest? Not just that you saw it, you also felt it, that particular heaviness that comes when you watch someone being diminished, overlooked, denied, and in a place beneath words that this is wrong. Most of us have felt it that way. Many of us have felt it on behalf of women in our lives, mothers who were set aside dreams so quietly we almost didn't notice, colleagues whose ideas were spoken by somebody else and applauded, women in our communities who sought help from systems designed to serve everyone but somehow always serve them last. That feeling, that weight is not helplessness. It is not grief. It is something more useful. It is the beginning of responsibility. And that is exactly where today begins. Yesterday, in the same space, we explored rights, what they are, who holds them, and who is often denied them. That conversation laid an important ground because you cannot talk about justice, that is today's theme, without understanding what rights look like and what it means when they exist on paper but not in practice. Today, we take it a step further. Today, we ask, once rights are declared, who ensures that they are upheld? Who is accountable when they are not? And what does it truly take to move from a right that is written into a right that is lived? That is the territory of justice, and it is harder to reign than it first appears. Right without enforcement are not rights. They are intentions, and intentions without people willing to uphold them, willing to uphold the systems accountable, change very little. We are here today because the world has a habit of producing beautiful language about justice and a far more complicated relationship with actually delivering it. Since 1995, there have been over 1,500 legal reforms across the world. And yet the United Nations has confirmed no country in the world has yet achieved fully legal equality between women and men. Not one. Globally, women hold only 64% of the legal rights than men hold. More than a third of what should be equal is simply missing. That is why today's gathering is like this one is not just a formality, it is a deliberate act of resistance. against the idea that talking about justice is enough, because is never is. Before we go further, I would want us to sit just for a moment with the scale of what we are talking about, because it's easy to hear about and talk about statistics and let them wash over us. I'm not asking you to do that today. Globally, 1 in 3 women has experienced physical or sexual violence. Of those, fewer than 40% have sought help. And of those who did, fewer than 10% went to the police. In 2024, 676 million women and girls, more than at any point since 1990, were living within 50 kilometers of active armed conflict. In those same settings, reports of conflict-related sexual violence rose by 87%. Around the world, 5 billion people have unmet justice needs. Women consistently are the most underserved among them. And in 2024, nearly 1 in 4 governments worldwide reported an active backlash against women's rights, not stagnation, not slow progress, but an active regression. And these are not distant numbers. They are the reality of women who woke up this morning in communities not so different than ours and found that the systems meant to protect them were either absent, inaccessible, or working against them. When justice fails women and girls, the damage goes far beyond any single story. Communities lose faith, public trust erodes, and justice institutions lose the very legitimacy they need to function at all. Justice is not just a women's issue. When women cannot access it, everyone's relationship with justice weakens. Every single one of us has a stake in getting this right. And this is what today's session is going to be all about. That, okay, when you amplify a woman's idea instead of letting it disappear, that is justice. When you mentor someone who has no one to open a door for them, that's justice. When you name an inequity you have the privilege of ignoring, that is justice. It's not always loud, but it is always a choice. Lived experience is not just evidence, it's testimony, and testimony demands a witness who does something with what they have. Today, you are that witness. You go, what you carry out of that room, one conversation, one idea, one door you'll open, one person that you will mentor. And that is where the change actually lives. Not in the systems we criticize, in the choices we make. People change systems, and this is the only way systems have ever changed. So today we'll explore justice as not confined to the courtrooms. It lives or fails to live in every institution a woman interacts with. And we will talk about uncomfortable questions. We will have a look at what are the experiences, what are the ideas that our amazing speakers from across the board, from across the globe bring in with their lived experiences, with the ideas that they have. And these are not questions with easy answers, but they're questions with real answers. These are about our lived experiences and what is it that all of us as a community, as a global leadership, what is it that we can do? And the speakers that you're about to hear today have not come today to deliver these finished answers. They've come to do something far more valuable. They've come to speak about from where they have actually stood, from the communities that they have served, the systems that they have challenged, the moments where they chose to keep going when walking away would have been easier. Listen to them the way you want to be listened to, not waiting for the next point, not filtering through what you already believe, but openly. The way a person listens when they sense that what they're about to hear might change something, because it might. It is one idea that can spark a change. And it is my deep honor to introduce our first speaker, someone whose work embodies exactly what justice in action looks like. Buhle Ndoda is a lecturer in political science at the University of South Africa, a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town, and a research fellow at the International Council of Human Rights, Peace and Politics. She holds a master's degree in international relations and undergraduate training in political science, philosophy, and business management, but her credentials, impressive as they are, only tell half a story of who she is. Because alongside her scholarship, Buhle is a co-founder of Give Hope Foundation and the founder of Acute Research Institute organization born not from ambition, but from the conviction that knowledge is only truly valuable when it finds its way into the lives of people who need it the most. Her work sits at the intersection of social justice, identity, and global economy, and she moves between those worlds not as a visitor, but as someone who belongs fully in all of them. In a session about justice, about what it truly means to hold systems accountable and move from lived experience to lasting change, there is perhaps no fitting voice with which to begin with. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Buhle Ndoda, who will be talking about ending violence against women and girls, a structural challenge. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Sanaa. It is much appreciated. I don't know if it's possible to share my screen from my side. Let me try. Can you all see it?
Not yet? Yes, we can see it. Please do
Alright.
make it full screen. It will be perfect.
How do I make it full screen?
Okay.
It's all right. Just Miss Buhle, just cross the view summary part. Just cross that.
Sorry?
You see the toolbox above? The tool
Yes.
line. You just cross that. Save the time with document summary. Just close, just X,
I
just close
should
it.
close it, yeah.
Oh no. Don't do that. It's okay, it's okay. Let's start. Let's start. We can continue.
All right. Thank you so much for that warm welcome and good day to everyone joining us today. Thank you for the opportunity to Women Ascension to be a part of this important conversation. Violence against women and girls is often treated as isolated events. Sometimes it's seen as something that happens between individuals in private spaces. But in reality, it reflects deeper systems of inequality, deeper systems of poverty and exclusion. In this presentation, I want us to briefly look at, as well as compare, how violence against women and girls manifests across the global north and global south. Look at how socio-economic conditions between these two divisions shape vulnerability. So my main point is that if violence is structural, then our response to it must be structural as well. In the global north, there are generally stronger legal systems, higher reporting rates, and more visible public conversations around women's rights. However, this does not mean violence is absent. It often means that violence is likely to be reported and processed through formal institutions. In the global south, however, violence against women and girls is frequently underreported. This is due to fear, lack of access to justice systems, as well as social stigma. Even when laws exist, enforcement is often inconsistent. In some contexts, you find that violence becomes normalized and embedded in everyday life. So it becomes a culture, it becomes a norm in some of these societies and regions. So the key difference is not whether violence exists, but it is how we recognize violence, how it is reported, and how it is actually addressed. Socioeconomic inequality plays a major role in shaping vulnerability to violence against women and girls. Poverty can trap women in abusive environments where leaving is not financially possible. Unemployment and economic instability can also increase stress, power, and just power struggles within households, which can sometimes escalate into violence. So unemployment and economic exclusion aren't just that, they can influence violence in households. Gender power imbalances also matter. Women often feel less in control over income, decision-making, as well as mobility, which increases dependence as well as vulnerability. Access in justice is also uneven. Many women cannot afford legal support, transport, or even the time to that is actually required or needed to pursue justice. This means violence is not only physical, it is sustained in systems that restrict women's choices and reinforce inequality. So in South Africa, in our country, this reality is a lot more clearer. The country has strong legal protections for women and girls, yet it continues to experience high levels of violence against women. This reflects deeper structural issues, especially inequality shaped by the legacy of apartheid. High unemployment and economic pressure creates environments where violence can become a form of control as well as domination. At the same time, gaps in justice systems, including delays, lack of trust, and security victimization, discourage many women from reporting. So while laws exist, their impact is limited without proper enforcement and broader social change. To end violence, or to actually end rather violence against women and girls, we need more than legal reform. We need to address inequality itself, because as long as inequality persists, vulnerability will also persist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Buhle and Ndoda. Very insightful talk with respect to that, okay, how both violence, yes, is structural, but our response also needs to be so. And that is at times what a lot of our communities and what the focus is not about. And you have very well summarized that, okay, what are the key factors that lead to underreporting, that lead to higher numbers of violence against women. What is there and what is it that we can do about that? Thank you so much for your insightful talk and for the pointers shared. Now, let's move on to our next speaker. Justice does not always announce itself with a raised voice or a slammed door. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest moments, a comment that goes unchallenged, an idea dismissed before it's finished, a girl in a classroom who learns without saying it directly that her voice matters a little less. Our next speaker has spent over 16 years paying attention to exactly these moments. Andy Lucchesi is a co-founder of Skilling Future, an AI and education strategist, and an ESL specialist based in Spain, a passionate advocate for upskilling, development, and building learning environments where every person is equipped not just with knowledge, but with the confidence to use it. She works with K-12 institutions across the world, designs training programs for educators, and contributes to AI for Africa, championing equitable access to the tools that are reshaping our world. Her focus today sits at an intersection that is often overlooked, the quiet cumulative harm of microaggressions in schools and workplaces, and what it truly costs girls and women when the environment meant to develop them are also the environments that diminish them. Because education without safety is not education. And opportunity without dignity is not opportunity. Andy understands both, and she's here to help us understand them. Please join me in welcoming Andy Lucchesi. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I am really honored to be part of this conversation today. So with no more further ado, as a waterfall, I would like to continue Ms. Buhle and Ndoda's presentation because this follows right under of what she was saying, understanding microaggressions against women and girls, and how we basically are talking about the stories of our lives. So I would like to quote Maya Angelou, and I would like to start with saying, each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women. My talk, I would like to focus on the importance of awareness and how awareness can be the key to opening the possibilities for reform and reestablishing new ideas and formats in mindsets and policies. So what is actually a microaggression? A microaggression is defined as a brief everyday exchange, verbal, nonverbal, or environmental, that communicates hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to members of marginalized groups. This would be the general idea. But what it happens when it comes to women, often called as gender microaggressions, and serve to undermine our authority, competence, and sense of belonging in environments like schools and workplaces, not to mention, of course, our everyday lives. So there are in psychology 3 categories of microaggressions that further during my talk, I would like to also mention a focus that it's happening in AI as well. So the first one would be micro assaults. That basically is the subtle snubs of intensive remarks that demean a woman's identity or competence. Micro invalidations, that are comments or actions that dismiss negative or ignore a woman's lived experience or thoughts. And micro insults, that are explicit, conscious, and deliberate derogations intended to hurt the victim through name calling or discriminatory actions. If you are interested in reading more about this, here is an extended resource page that I am going to share with you later on when I finish my presentation. So how does it look like in the classroom? In the classroom, a micro insult would be assuming a female student is a junior or a support role, such as mistaking a woman for a nurse instead of a doctor, or an assistant instead of a manager. Sounds familiar? Micro assaults, using sexist slurs or humor that degrades women and girls in the classroom to signal they are inferior or do not belong. And then micro invalidations, an instructor consistently calling on male students more frequently than female students, signaling that their contributions are more valuable. It is important also to mention myself as an educator that this doesn't necessarily happen from male to female directly. It happens from females and males that have these mental structures internalized in their behaviors. Let's continue. How does this look like in the work space? But then before we go there, I would like to quote, "We realize the importance of our voices only when we are silenced." So in the workplace, micro insult would look like complimenting a woman by saying, "You're so good at coding for being a girl," or for being a woman, which implies women are generally not expected to excel in technical fields, not to mention other STEM fields. Micro invalidations, repeatedly interrupting a woman in meetings or having a man take credit for her ideas and repeat them as theirs, or as we called mansplaining. Microaggressions, actively denying a woman a promotion based on her gender. So this leads, especially in the workplace, to burnout, to self-doubt, to silence, and finally to departure. So it is micro aggressions basically are always putting women in the corner. Now, more specifically in my field, AI for education, how does a microaggressions looks like in particularly artificial intelligence and the rise of AI? It looks a lot like gender bias. Large language models often exhibit significant gender bias because that is what the information they have been fed with. Also, the enlargement of deep fake risks, where, for example, if you are familiar within the conversation, we have large language models like Grok, for instance, that continue with the disproportionality of female targeting when it comes to the creation of images and also the sexualization of the same. So in this case, we can talk about real world impacts such as not only created by the ones that I have mentioned before, but if we use artificial intelligence in workspaces or schools, it can bring imbalanced training data where we would corner again the women and put them under as they were underperforming. It would create professional disparities, not to mention, of course, educational influence. Like, for example, when in schools, we will continue perpetuating the idea that women don't belong to STEM careers, for example. And then, of course, performance gaps where there can that can be that can create male-centric data. So what can be the ripple effect? The ripple effect would be the normalization of diminishment, where we continue normalizing this in our cultures. This microaggressions that perpetuates the ground for violence are always gradually ascending in our lives because it comes of part of our social structures. And then, of course, structural exclusion. It is part of a systemic exclusion for women. And then, of course, it affects us in roles in leadership, not to mention life opportunities. So what is it that we can do? We can take individual actions. We can participate in talks like this in order to keep on creating awareness and keep on working word to mouth and institutional changes. If we are part of the system and we are in places of power, let's use that power for good, especially addressing issues that will affect both genders or gender bias. And then, of course, systemic support, where we can advocate for regulatory frameworks that support gender responsive AI governance, for example, if we are participating in anything related to artificial intelligence, but in education spaces or workspaces as well. I would like to close my intervention by quoting Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, saying, I matter equally, not if only, not as long as I matter, full stop. So thank you so much for your time. And if you like to contact me, here is my LinkedIn, my website, and if you like to follow me on Instagram as well here. And as I promised, because I'm going to share this presentation, here are all the references with their links, so you can benefit from it later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andy, for such an insightful discussion over what is happening. Not only discussion of what microaggressions are and in what way the authority, as you talked about, is undermined, but you also have talked about how microaggression is present within AI. And a lot of times as users, people may not be aware of how when AI is giving a response, how the training data bias that is present within it is also reflected in the responses that it is giving. And a lot of times, data from respective communities, from indigenous communities, is also not represented there. And in a way that will not showcase what is the diversity of thought, what are the ideas that are there. And I really love the quote that you brought in. That is, I matter equally. And then how these are the things that we really, really need to talk about. And these are the things that do matter, especially with how AI is disrupting each and every field and how it is being used as of the moment. It is imperative that we take on more critical discussions about that as well. Thank you so much again, Andy, for your excellent presentation. Now we move on to our next speaker. And one of the most underestimated forces of change in any society is the classroom teacher, the person who day after day shapes how the next generation understands the world, their place in it, and their responsibility to it. Our next speaker knows that word from the inside. Bikanda Serge Romuald is a high school teacher of history, geography, and citizenship from Cameroon, where he has been teaching since 2013 across the southeast and center regions of his country. He holds a master's in education in history and a master of public administration in international environmental law. And a combination of that speaks to someone who thinks not just about where we have come from, but where we are headed and what we owe the world we inhabit. Beyond the classroom, he has worked with NGOs in environmental protection and sustainable development and has spent the last 5 years as a member of AGUI Foundation dedicated to volunteerism, education, and the dignity and health of persons living with disabilities. His voice is rooted in community, in teaching, and in the kind of long-term thinking that comes from someone who has committed his career to building citizens, not just graduates. Please join me in welcoming Bikanda for his talk about ending violence against women and girls, facts, figures, and illustrations in Cameroon and around the world. The speech will be in French, and I will be sharing the translation of what his presentation is about in the chat as well. So the floor is yours, Bikanda. Bikanda, are you there? Okay.
Mr. Bikanda, if you can hear us, your mic is mute. Please, your mic.
Yeah, I have messaged
Okay.
him. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to you. And let me greet you to give me to express myself in my first language, in French. Ok, la thématique sur laquelle nous allons vous entretenir aujourd'hui porte sur mettre fin aux violences faites aux femmes et filles. Alors, les violences faites aux femmes et aux filles constituent l'une des violations des droits de l'homme ou des droits humains les plus répandues et les moins sanctionnées. Elles touchent toutes les sociétés indépendamment du niveau de développement et surtout freinent le niveau de développement, surtout la réalisation des objectifs du développement durable. À cet effet, elles se présentent sous plusieurs formes. Les principales sont d'ordre physique, telles que les coups, les féminicides qui renvoient au meurtre, aux assassinats des femmes à cause de leur genre. Elles sont également d'ordre sexuel, tels que les viols, les abus, les mariages forcés ou même en bas âge, aller en mariage avant d'être majeur. Il y a également des formes psychologiques telles que les intimidations et les humiliations dont font face les femmes au quotidien, peu importe le cadre. Ça peut être à la maison, ça peut être au service, ça peut être même dans la rue. Et l'autre forme la plus répandue, surtout ici au Cameroun, c'est la privation des ressources. Quand je parle de ressources, je parle des ressources économiques. Voyez-vous, certaines femmes sont parfois privées de leur argent de ration une fois qu'elles ne sont pas en bon terme avec leur époux. Parfois même d'autres, dans leur milieu de service, elles ne peuvent même pas avoir le même salaire à compétences égales avec les hommes, soit parce que le patron a une autre vue derrière elle, soit pour d'autres raisons. Bien. Nous embrayons donc sur la situation mondiale. Justement, selon l'OMS, une femme sur 3 subit des violences physiques et ou sexuelles. Et 12 millions de femmes mariées de force chaque année. On a également les conflits armés qui aggravent les violences, notamment dans les pays voisins, en RDC, la République démocratique du Congo, tout comme en Afghanistan. Maintenant, pour le cas particulier du Cameroun, on énumère à plus de 60%, exactement 66% selon le ministère de la Promotion des femmes et de la famille. Les femmes déclarent avoir subi une forme de violence, quelle que soit, selon ce qu'on vient d'énumérer tout à l'heure. Pour le cas des mariages forcés et précoces, ils sont plus fréquents dans le nord et l'extrême nord de notre pays. C'est le cas de Aïssatou, qui a été mariée à Maroua à l'âge de 14 ans et a donc vu ses rêves ainsi brisés. C'est aussi le cas des féminicides. Depuis au moins une dizaine d'années, il y en a un grand nombre au Cameroun. Les plus marquants sont ceux de Vanessa Tchatchoua, qui le 20 août 2011 avait, je crois, 17 ans, c'était une jeune élève, dont le bébé a disparu après qu'elle ait accouché dans un hôpital de Yaoundé, l'hôpital gynéco-obstétrique de Ngousso, ça se trouve à Yaoundé. Au réveil, elle a trouvé que son bébé avait disparu. Ça a porté les choux gras de la presse pendant longtemps. Le bébé, finalement, il a été retrouvé mort. Et aujourd'hui, cette dernière est étudiante, elle est stagiaire au barreau du Cameroun parce qu'elle a pris ce problème à cœur. Depuis lors, elle a décidé de faire les études de droit alors qu'elle était une lycéenne en 2011 quand les faits sont produits. Aujourd'hui, elle est avocate stagiaire au barreau du Cameroun. Et ensuite, il y a le cas le plus patent, Diane Yango, qui avait à peine la trentaine. Elle était une professeure de lycée, a été tuée le 18 novembre 2023, battue à mort par son époux, dans les services même de l'hôpital. Et surtout de Divine Barga, ça c'est un des cas les plus récents, il y a qu'un mois. Divine Barga, alors âgée de 11 ans, une collégienne, s'est rendue dans le domicile d'un de ses camarades et le père de ce dernier a abusé d'elle et l'a tuée. Le 18 mars 2026, ça fait exactement un mois. Donc voilà 3 cas de féminicide qui sont très graves, qui montrent que c'est assez poussé chez nous au Cameroun. Alors, cela n'est donc pas sans conséquences. Ces conséquences sont donc d'ordre individuel et même collectif. Sur le plan individuel, il y a des traumatismes, des blessures, perte de confiance vis-à-vis de celui à qui vous a fait cela. Et même au niveau familial, les enfants sont affectés. Ils ont plus peur du bourreau, notamment du papa. Et sur le plan sociétal, de manière générale, il y a frein au développement. Quand on sait que chez nous, au Cameroun, la femme, c'est elle la base de l'économie, puisque notre économie est encore d'ordre rural. L'agriculture, c'est la femme, la pêche, c'est la femme. Donc, beaucoup d'activités économiques sont au ralenti lorsque la femme n'est pas épanouie ou alors lorsqu'elles subissent toutes ces violences. Il y a la baisse de production ou de productivité. Tout comme sur le plan économique, le coût estimé à des milliards, il y a beaucoup de pertes qui se chiffrent en milliards de dollars par an. Et maintenant, quelles solutions ou actions pouvons-nous proposer? Elles sont d'ordre préventif. Tout commence par l'éducation à la maison et se poursuit à l'école. Et même dans nos confessions religieuses, l'éducation à l'égalité dès l'école, dès la maison, égalité entre les genres. Personne n'est supérieur aux autres. Ou alors, l'homme n'est pas supérieur à la femme. Si l'enfant est éduqué ainsi dès la base, je crois que cela réduirait ces fléaux-là. Mais aussi, il faut embrayer sur la protection. Les réfugiés pour les victimes. Vous savez que depuis quelques 10 ans déjà, on a les crises au nord-ouest et au sud de notre pays, dont Les réfugiés sont un peu partout dans tout le Cameroun. Il y a également le renforcement des lois, puisque étant un état de droit, il faut renforcer le système juridique. La justice, justement, il faut que les poursuites soient effectives, pas des bourreaux qu'on va relâcher quelque temps après. Mais il faut également une grande mobilisation sociale qui passe par les campagnes de sensibilisation, le rôle des médias et surtout des leaders religieux. Parce qu'au Cameroun, voyez-vous, le pape était encore là jusqu'à, je crois, hier. Et vous avez vu peut-être dans les médias comment ceux qui croient en l'Église catholique sont drainés, là fait 3 jours. Donc, l'Église a aussi son rôle ou son mot à dire. On a également des exemples d'associations ou alors oui, qui travaillent déjà pour cela. Il y a des ONG localement, le Renata, l'ALFV, Horizon Femmes, quelques collectifs comme Stop Féminicide 237, quelques actions de certains ministères, notamment le ministère de la promotion de la femme et de la famille, qui joue quand même son rôle, le ministère des Affaires sociales et aussi le ministère de la Justice, bien que leur action ne soit pas des plus visibles, mais il y a une base, un minimum. Que dire en conclusion et à titre d'appel à l'action? Mettre fin aux violences faites aux femmes et filles, c'est construire une société, j'allais dire, juste et prospère. Chacun donc a un rôle, notamment dénoncer, on commence par dénoncer, protéger et sensibiliser au quotidien. Il n'y a pas d'une seule minute à perdre et on doit le faire régulièrement. Il faut donc que cela soit fait par l'union, par la solidarité, mais aussi par un gain d'espoir. Il faut toujours garder espoir que cela connaîtra probablement une fin, si ce n'est une réduction. Merci beaucoup à tous. Merci. Hello.
Thank you so much for your insightful talk, Bikanda. And again, you were talking about the same idea that Buhle had talked about, that how violence against women is more of a systematic issue. And it is not just about, as you have rightly talked about, that an issue in Cameroon, but something that is globally present. And ending violence against women and girls requires this cross connection between and this active mobilization, not only at the grassroots level, but also at every level of the community, where you created this awareness that, okay, where all of us go beyond that idea of awareness and work towards ensuring that wherever we see such things happening, we raise our voice against such issues, we become part of such communities, that we are able to talk about such things. Thank you so much for raising these and talking about these insights. There are a lot of questions that are there, but I hope so that we'll be able to address them at the end. Okay, so let's move forth to our next speaker. Access to opportunity rarely announces itself. It more often it arrives quietly through a conversation with the right person at the right moment, through a mentor who saw something at the right moment or saw something before you did, through someone who decided that your potential was worth investing in. Our next speaker has made that kind of an access her life's mission. Lydia, Adjei, is a certified HR professional, career coach, talent development strategist, and the founder of Get Your Answers Consult in Ghana. A full member of the Chartered Institute of Human Resource Management, she specializes in career development, recruitment, and workforce readiness, and has delivered over 50 speaking engagements across universities, corporate institutions, and international platforms, including the European Union delegation in Ghana. Her work has been featured on television, radio, and in publications leading the Daily Graphic and The Mirror. Lydia is the creator of Career Leap Framework, built around 4 deceptively simple ideas: learn, excel, accelerate, and pivot. A framework that treats a career not as a ladder to climb, but as a living, breathing thing that grows when you do. She's a recipient of the HR Contribution Award and the HR Future Leader Under 35 Award, a mentor with Women Ascension, and an HR Certification Center National Mentorship Program. and a voice consistent and committed for women, girls, youth, and professionals who deserve more than the doors that we open for them. Her own educational journey is itself a testament of why girl child education is not just a talking point, but a turning point. Please join me in welcoming Miss Lydia. Miss Lydia, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone on the call. I'm very excited to be here. And I don't know if my video, you can see me from wherever you are, but if you can't, I don't know, but it's on anyways. So one thing we must all understand is that we have had strong perspectives, definitions, and recommendations, right? Speaker 1, Speaker 2, Speaker 3, and this is Speaker 4. We've heard a lot, whether perspectives, whether definitions, whether recommendations. But for me, the critical question is, why does violence against women and girls still persist? Why does violence against women and girls still persist? Because at this point, awareness is not the problem, I think, because in Ghana and across the world, there have been a lot of awareness, programs, perspectives, laws, a whole lot. But for me, where I sit, awareness is not the problem. But what is the problem? The problem is action. Action is the challenge. Action is the problem. And most importantly, the gap between what we say and what women and girls are actually experiencing is where the crisis lives. I am speaking from the Ghanaian perspective. I have experienced two cases of situations, one stigma and the other one keeping quiet. Two individuals going through violence, right? The first person kept it to herself. The second individual spoke, and the end result was it was better she kept silent. Now, I like the fact that the third speaker gave us some definitions and took us through some physical, sexual, psychological, and economic aspects of violence. All right. Now, let's look at the policy versus the reality gap. Now, in Ghana and many countries, the issue is not always the absence of law, as I indicated. We have the policies anyway, we have the frameworks, and we have international organizations and commitments, like how Women Ascension is actually advocating and putting all the effort to ensure that violence against women and girls go beyond awareness towards action. But the reality is a different story. Now, let me tell you why. Because a system is only strong as the people who experience that system. So let's say if we have a system that should actually help girls and women against violence, and I approach that system and I don't get what I'm supposed to get, I don't get justice, I don't get action, and I'm not getting the result, it means that there's a challenge with the system. That is what I'm talking about. Now, for many survivors of violence, one thing is that the reporting systems are not always accessible or safe, number one. Number two, the support structures are limited and funded or unclear. So sometimes you may enter an institution and you don't even know where to report to, where there are issues of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional harm, economic control, and all other aspects. So for me, what does a law mean if a survivor cannot use it without fear, without delay, and without discouragement? A system that exists on paper but fails in practice does not protect, it only reassures. Now, let me look at it from the human aspect, right? We must also understand that violence is not only physical, but it goes beyond that. And this is where this conversation can actually stop very early. Because when a woman is aware of the right, awareness, and alone, and does not guarantee safety and exit, then the problem is action. Economic dependence, fear of stigma, lack of shelter, childcare, responsibilities, social welfare, all combined in a system that traps rather than frees. So when we ask, why don't they leave? We also often ask the wrong question. Now, let me look at some of the challenges to systems and institutions, right? All right. Now, if the reporting systems are intimidating, they fail. If shelters are insufficient, they fail. If justice is delayed, it fails. If protection depends on privilege, then it is not protection, it is selection. And selection is not justice. Let's look at the next slide, please. The next slide. Hi, the next slide. So I have a quote here. I'm saying that violence is not, okay, it's fine. All right. So the quote here is that silence is not cultural, it is constructed and it can be dismantled. Why am I saying that? Most of these issues of violence are because of our cultural systems, right? When silence is termed as respect and opening up is termed as what? Disrespect. So when we are able to break this cultural and the construction of the culture, we can dismantle this kind of thing called violence, and it can actually be minimized. So I'm looking at what we can change. We have to, number one, break the silence. We have to shift from norms and protect survivors. It is a collective approach. Number two, we have to strengthen the systems. In fact, a system that is not able to produce, justice is not a system. It is actually contributing to the ecosystem of violence, fear, and discouragement. We have to enforce laws and provide support. Now, let's look at economic empowerment. We have to help women become independent so that they can actually voice out. I have mediated stories, experiences of women who are actually still in violence because they are not economically empowered. And this must change. Now, one mistake that I see, because I have done this for a while, I see reoccurring is that mostly we focus on women and girls, forgetting that these violence do not occur in isolation. It doesn't take one person as a girl, it doesn't take one person as a woman for violence to prevail. It takes two. So we need to also bring to the table, let's involve the men, let's involve the boys. So collectively, it becomes a shared responsibility. Now, accountability, we may have to measure actions and enforce consequences. Now, closing from awareness to action. I want us to know that we must move from commitment to consequences, from promises to protection, because until there are real consequences for perpetrators and real protection for survivors, violence will continue to be rationalized, minimized, and repeated. The question is whether we are willing to act at the level that really demands, not the level that is comfortable to discuss. So we may be discussing, but we have to move from discussing to where it demands action and enough protection. Let's move from awareness to action. This is where I bring my presentation to a close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lydia, for this powerful talk about why awareness actually is not the problem. It is about that, okay, how silence, how the systems that are present, what is ongoing, that is what we need to combat, and it needs to go beyond just an awareness about what the statistics are, and as I talked about earlier, what the policy is. If the policy, as you said, is not supporting, if the system or if justice is delayed in any way, then we have failed. So to ensure that everything is working out well, we need to make sure that everyone becomes part of the system, that it's not just women in the conversation, but it is also all of the community members who are a part of that, because it is together that we can move forward. Now, let's move forth to our next speaker. At 21, most people are still figuring out what they want to do with their lives. Our next speaker has already built a body of work that many journalists spend an entire career researching for. Cynthia Ebot Takang is an award-winning Cameroonian journalist and media information and literacy trainer. She covers daily business reporting in Ecofin agency and freelances for international outlets, including Global Voices, Minority Africa, and Mixed Migration Review. In 2025, she produced 2 in-depth investigative reports of Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, one funded by the Open Society Foundation and was recognized with an award for the best reporting under that grant. She was also second runner-up in the Takang Storytelling Advocacy Contest. But what distinguishes Cynthia is not just where she reports, it is what she does with the platform journalism gives her. She co-founded Mentees Libres, a team of young Cameroonians teaching digital skills to vulnerable children affected by the ongoing crisis in her country. Under her leadership, that team won the 2025 UNESCO Media Information and Literacy Youth Hackathon. She also volunteers with Open Dreams, supporting youth in achieving their educational goals globally. And she continues with remarkable consistency for someone so early in her career to show that storytelling is not just a profession. In the right hands, it's an instrument of justice. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Mrs. Moderator. Thank you so much for having me. But as much as I'm very flattered by that wonderful introduction, I'd like to thank Women Ascension for having me here, but it means nothing to me that I am all of that when there are women out here who are not able to use their potential to the fullest like I have because of some sort of violence or the other. So today I'd like to focus on accountability, stronger systems, and impunity, not on the surface level, but on a deeper level that especially connects how fear and how non-access to the right information and tools keeps victims on the floor. So I'd like to start with this powerful quote by Malala Yousafzai, which says that, please, can you just confirm that you can hear me before I proceed? Okay. All right, great. Malala Yousafzai once said that we realize the importance of our voices only when we are silenced. And many survivors of violence, silence is not a choice. It's a condition that has been created by fear. And I'm very happy with what my previous speakers have said, especially in the aspect of microaggressions. And the speaker just before me from Ghana, who spoke about what needs to be done now. We have heard a lot about the law that exists. We've heard a lot about what can be done. But I think we should hear more about some of the victim side, and especially some of the things that, because there cannot be justice if the victims do not report. For there to be justice, people need to speak up. The victims need to speak up. Those that see or hear something need to speak up. So if you're here, you can just ask yourself, when have you ever witnessed something that has an injustice situation towards a woman or a girl? When have you stood in line and a man has wanted to pass and he couldn't hold you by your hand, he held you by your waist to push you? That is violence. And those are the kinds of things that people, they give you something to argue about. You don't know if it's violence. You went to see a partner, you wake up in the morning, you feel tired, you don't remember doing anything, and he tells you, oh, I took advantage of you, or I did this or that. You're asking yourself, is it rape? Is it rape? You don't know where to decide. And those are the things that keep women in silence. So globally, nearly 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, according to the World Health Organization. And in that 1 in 3 women, less than 40% of these survivors actually seek help. And among the 40% that actually seek help, that do not seek help, an even smaller number of that pursue a formal investigation. So this gap is not just about weak laws. It's about whether survivors feel able, informed, and safe enough to speak up. So I'll start by giving some reasons to why telling the story is difficult. And research show that survivors often remain silent because of fear of stigma, fear of retaliation, and lack of trust in institutions. And importantly, the trauma itself, because the idea that many of us here have survivors, but many of us have been able to bounce back from what happened in our childhoods, from 1 or 2 things that were trying to stop us as women in gray. Many of us have been able to bounce back. But what we forget is that not everybody bounces back. Some people, something happens to them, some sort of violence, and they just fall into a hole and remain there, not because they are weak, but because it is difficult. It takes an incredible amount of strength to stand up from that hole. Men have tried to suppress us for years. Some women have become suppressed. Some women have even started helping men to suppress other women. So you can imagine that these are the things that keep victims unable to tell their stories. And secondly, a very important reason is victim blaming. And inside victim blaming, there is something that exists in the digital world that I would really like to speak about, which is looking for the perfect victim. You come online to tell your story. I slept at this hotel somewhere, and I don't know if I was raped at night or not. But you don't remember all the details of the story, but you decide to make a video nonetheless. And then you have people in the comment section coming, what dress were you wearing? Start asking questions because you don't look like the perfect victim. They want you to remember all the facts, have all the answers to the questions. They want you to present the story in a certain way. Don't call the person's name if the person is a public figure. So I think this aspect of making victim blaming, and if I hear a story, the first thing is, how are you doing? Not, okay, who are you trying to accuse? The victim tends to be scared, especially when they don't recall exactly what happened. They fear being silenced because the social media has created a standard for victims. As a victim, you must be perfect, you must cry, and you must report it immediately. If you come with a case 5 years later, okay, rape is no longer rape. Assault is no longer assault. They want you to report it in a particular, they have set rules. But I want you to tell you as a victim that you have the right to speak up when you want to. It was rape 20 years ago. It is still rape today. Next, I want to talk about the role of legal knowledge for each and every one of us here. One of the most undiscussed barriers to justice is lack of awareness. In many countries across Africa, including my country, Cameroon, laws define rape and sexual violence with specific criteria, such as lack of consent, coercion, and abuse of power. Like in my country, Cameroon, that's how rape is defined: coercion, lack of consent, abuse of power. But there are many things that women experience and new forms of violence that even sprout every day that are not considered in these laws. This creates a dangerous gap because a person may experience violence but not even recognize it as a crime. Why should a man want to hold you in line or want to pass by and decides to hold you only by an intimate part? That's a micro form of violence, and it's something that you don't even know whether it's rape or not. What happens to a spouse, a husband? They say a husband cannot rape the wife. That's not true. There are so many things that go on, especially where there is a framework like marriage, that still goes into violence. And I think that we should begin to recognize these things if we want to actually move past them. And then third is understanding the protection and processes, because beyond definition, survivors need to understand where to report, what evidence is required, what protections exist. After what you do, you should take a rape kit. You should go to the hospital. You should take pictures. You should sometimes building a case. Immediately after that, what should you do? I think there should be more communication from us who are in the field on this stuff, because sometimes the law is simplified. We don't even read our constitution in our countries to know what is said or what is not said about the law. So I think if you're having an honest discussion with all of your female friends, at least if you're 10 of you, at least 5 of you is going to recall an instance where you've experienced some kind of violence, but you laugh about it because I don't know if it's been a long time ago. It's this, you don't actually want to say this. And someone asked a question earlier about rape in crisis regions, why it's more frequent. And I think it's more frequent because there is no framework there to protect the women. There is war going on. There are military officers who have the rank than the military, and they just see women as the tools. Okay, I'm going to use you for this. You're going to cook for us. You're going to do this. So I think that survivors need safe platforms. They need trauma-informed systems. We need to simplify the law for everyone to understand, and especially create laws that hold the perpetrators accountable. Because I think for every woman out here, there is no one-time rapist. If you've done it once, you will do it again. And if you've done it, the next thing you're looking for is an opportunity to do it. I think we've heard of the Rape Academy that was discovered recently, which has a following of over 62 million men who are posting videos online of how they're raping their spouses, what doses to give your wife so they don't OD as you take advantage of them as they're sleeping. It's crazy to see that Okay, there's no law now for that kind of thing. That's why I haven't heard any arrests since the news came out. There's been no arrest. What are we doing to ensure that, okay, after you, and that's why many people don't speak up. After I speak up, after all, it's a big person, the case is going to be closed. But I bet you, if you follow the right channel and you make sure that what he's done to me, I will make sure that he will not do to any other person, that is going to go down in the law, and you are going to come out as somebody who saved hundreds of other women who could be if that man's victim. So to close, I'm just going to say that ending violence against women and girls is not only about stronger laws or harsher penalties, it's about ensuring that it is and creating a safe space for a survivor to speak up and to make sure that all women and girls are informed, they are protected, and they are heard without fear. Because justice does not begin in the courtroom. It begins the moment a survivor feels safe enough to tell her story. And it begins especially when she is sure that there is no impunity and that the perpetrators, especially the known perpetrators, are brought to book. Because many of us here know people who do these things. We work with them, we're friends with them, especially among the boys. You guys have drinks, but you never call out your male friend whom you know abuses his spouse or his sister. Sometimes just a simple call out, hey man, what you do is not right. She's also a human being. And there's this common phrase that goes around, what if she was your sister? No, what if it were you? Nobody likes another person to hit them or inflict pain on them. But just that simple call out save the life of a woman. If you see something, you say something. If you know something, you say something. So thank you very much for your time. And sorry I didn't prepare a PowerPoint. The Pope has been in Cameroon for the past 3 days. I'm a journalist. It has been crazy. So I just jotted out a few points, and the other speakers, you guys are doing amazing. Kudos. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer. And my LinkedIn is my name, Cynthia Ebot. I'll be happy to connect with you all. And like I said, tell your story to make sure the world heals you. If not, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So thank you very much,
Thank you
everyone.
so much, Cynthia, for such an insightful talk. And I really loved your point when you said that, okay, it takes an incredible amount of courage to speak up, to stand against those systems and institutions that were built in a way that they were already against you. And instead of supporting the victims, instead of supporting somebody who has talked about the issue, who has talked about her story, instead of supporting them, we are always judging them against this checklist of a perfect victim. And yes, your example of the Rape Academy, I was reading about that today. And a lot of times we say, oh, men would talk about that, okay, not me. But then there are 62 million of them. And then what is happening there, whether or not is that brought to justice, talks about a lot of what's ongoing globally. That, okay, it is not just one person's issue, it is something that is societal and global. So thank you so much for your insights and talking about such an important aspect as to why it is so important, not just to stand up, but also to support the person who stands up. Thank you. Now, we've talked a lot about, great deal about spaces like these in changing systems, but systems most of the time are led by people. And people, however capable and driven, carry their own exhaustion, their own armor, their own quietly accumulated cost of showing up in a world that does not always make it easy. Our next speaker works at precisely that intersection between the leader the world sees and the person underneath. Cordelia Gaffar is the CEO of Cordelia Gaffar Enterprises and Leadership Presence Strategist, guiding high-level leaders beyond exhaustion and emotional shutdown into something rarer and more durable, grounded confidence and authentic influence. Through embodiment and intimacy intelligence, she helps leaders develop the kind of presence that does not perform, it simply is. Cordelia's work is built on a belief that leadership, which is honest, sustainable, and deeply human, is not a softer version of leadership. It is a stronger one because it does not break. In a room full of people committed to building a world more than a just word, her reminder that a person driving the change also deserves care, clarity, and wholeness is not a detour from the conversation. It is essential to it. Please join me in welcoming Cordelia, who will be speaking on the silent violence we ignore, redefining violence against women and girls. Cordelia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sanaa. And thank you, Women Ascension, for this beautiful conference. I have really resonated with all the talks of my previous speakers. As a somatic healer who works with people in breath work, I have used what I talk about to address the violence that happens in the home. And so this is why I want to bring a different lean into this conversation. And it's been alluded to in some of the talks, that silent violence that we ignore is by simply redefining what is violence, right? So violence is not just something where you can see the bruises. Violence is something much more subtler. And I have many conversations about this on my podcast called What People Miss. It's emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is that form of psychological harm that eats away slowly at someone's self-esteem, their confidence, and their sense of worthiness. And yet it's widely minimized, right? They're misunderstood or dismissed entirely. Many legal systems, and I have experienced this myself through my divorce, which ended because of domestic violence, but was recorded as irreconcilable differences, right? We simply just couldn't get along. It was minimized. It was normalized. It's okay that your husband gets a little heated sometimes. It's okay that he talks down to the children, your daughters, more than the sons. It's in the way the violence is happening, in the way that we raise our children, and we normalize that boys can be boys, which results in things like the Rape Academy. And as a representative of the United States and so far the global North, it's not much different here than it is anywhere else in the world. Violence comes also in financial abuse. Poverty is not relative, right? You can live in a house with your husband, have your own income, he has his own income, but for some reason, women are taught to agree to give over all finances to their husband. That is a form of violence. Controlling access to money, preventing someone from working, forcing financial dependence is too often overlooked, even though it traps women and girls in cycles that they cannot easily escape. Sexual abuse, intimidation, degradation. These are things that are happening every single day in several homes. Daughters being molested by their fathers, their cousins, or other male relatives, and then later being forced to marry them. But let's be clear, these are not personality traits. These are forms of violence, because violence is not just about physical force. The World Health Organization defines violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, whether threatened or actual, against another person or a group that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, deprivation, and disrupted development. In plain language, violence is a use of force to hurt and control or destroy someone. And when you look through the lens, the silence breaks. Like right here in this room, it's very loud, right? It's very loud what's happening. But in real life, we dismiss it. Control is violence. Intimidation is violence. Humiliation is violence. Isolation is violence. So if we're serious about stopping violence against women and girls, we cannot only focus on the visible, we must confront the invisible. We must challenge the everyday behaviors that go unchecked, the jokes that degrade, the jealousy framed as love, the control disguised as protection, the silence that protects the abuser more than the victim. Stopping violence requires more than intervention. It requires redefinition. We have to redefine what we tolerate, what we normalize, what we excuse, because every time we dismiss emotional harm as not that bad, we create space for escalation. And every time we fail to name those behaviors as violence, we delay prevention. So what do? Listen without minimizing. Educate without defensiveness. We hold people accountable, not just for actions, but for patterns of power and control. And we teach the next generation that strength is not domination and love is not control. Ending violence against women and girls is not just about stopping harm after it happens. It's about recognizing it while it's still being whispered, before it has a chance to scream, because the most dangerous form of violence are often the ones we've been taught not to see. And once we see them clearly, we can no longer ignore them. That's where change begins, changing the conversation with how we raise our sons and how we raise our daughters, and what we teach our daughters to accept as respect, as love, as normal. Setting the environment for our sons to also recognize that it's not normal to degrade or humiliate someone just because they're female-bodied. It's not okay to laugh about it with your friends. It's not okay to make water cooler jokes at work. And most definitely, I apologize to the world as being from the global north, and most of the men that are part of that rape academy are from my country. Just imagine we raise our daughters and tell them, when you're married, you'll be safe. 1 in 4 women now know that's absolutely untrue. Let's make it known that we're not going to normalize violence. We're not going to laugh at jokes. We're going to raise our sons differently, and we're going to raise our daughters differently. I love that we're having this conversation today, but if you want to continue this conversation, connect with me on LinkedIn under Cordelia Gaffar, where I have a newsletter called You're the Possibility, my Substack, and also my podcast, What People Miss on YouTube. Thank you, and let's redefine violence.
Thank you so much, Cordelia. I really loved how you drew the cross connection between experiences that I think were familiar to a lot of us with respect to forcing financial dependence, where you talked about degradation and this idea of silence also as protecting the abuser and not in any way serving the person or serving the victim. And you've talked about it rightly that we have in the last couple of years focused a lot on making women stronger, ensuring that our daughters are independent, are working within the community, but have we also made the same effort with respect to raising our sons right and doing the right job there? So as you talked about, violence is not sometimes where we can always see the bruises. It is the emotional, most of the time, what happens also with respect to emotional abuse that is taking place, where we can see it with respect to the microaggressions, where we are snubbed in our workplaces, at our home, and in a lot of other spaces and places. So thank you so much for your talk. Amazing insights that have been shared till here. Thank you so much again, Cordelia. Let's move on to our next speaker and keep the momentum going with respect to the wonderful ideas and insights that have been shared by our speakers, how powerful they are, and what is there to learn for all of us. Now, law at its best is the codification of what a society has agreed to protect, but law does not write itself and it does not enforce itself. It is shaped by the people who study it, teach it, question it, and refuse to let it remain comfortable when it falls short. Our next speaker is one of those people. Eileen Taylor is a human rights scholar, educator, and advocate, currently serving as a lecturer and assistant director of the grant writing office at Jindal Global Law School in India, where she teaches human rights and international law to the next generation of legal professionals. She is also the co-director of Politics for Her Europe Hub, leading research on women's political participation and gender justice across Europe. Eileen's scholarship sits at the question that is as urgent as it is unexplored. How do legal frameworks shape structural inequality? And how does structural inequality in turn shape law? It is a loop, and she is determined to break it. Her work is grounded in intersectional feminist methodology, reproductive rights law, and international human rights policy, brought together by the conviction that understanding how power operates within legal systems is the first step to making those systems more just. She does not just teach law, she interrogates it. Please join me in welcoming Eileen Taylor for her talk on the 32,000 problem, access to justice in the age of digital violence.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's an honor to be here at this panel with these wonderful speakers. So, what does justice look like in the digital age? And I think more importantly, who actually has access to it? Today, I want to talk to you about a number, 32,000. That was the number of members in an Italian Facebook group called Mia Moglie, or My Wife in English. But this was not a harmless online community. It was a space where women's bodies were treated as property, where intimate photos, often shared without consent, were posted, dissected, and degraded, where men openly exchanged fantasies of sexual violence, including rape. Many of these women didn't even know they were there. Some were photographed while sleeping, others while changing. Some simply existed in public spaces, shopping, walking, living their lives, only to be turned into targets of humiliation and abuse. This is not just harassment, this is digital gender-based violence. And it raises a critical question. Where was the justice? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Italy already has laws that should have protected these women. There are legal provisions against non-consensual sharing of images, laws that criminalize violations of privacy, regulations that require platforms to act against sexual exploitation. On paper, justice exists, but in reality, this group operated for 6 years. 6 years of reports, 6 years of inaction, 6 years where 32,000 people participated in a system that dehumanized women without consequence. Justice delayed is justice denied. And in the digital world, delay is not neutral, it is complicity. The group was only taken down after public outrage, after journalists, activists, and politicians forced attention onto it. Even then, the response was slow. And when the group disappeared, another one appeared, and then another. This revealed a deeper failure, not just of platforms, but of legal enforcement. Because access to justice is not just about having laws. It's about whether these laws are effective, accessible, and enforced in real time. Right now, they're not. Victims are expected to file formal complaints, navigate complex legal systems, and prove harm, while perpetrators hide behind anonymity and speed. By the time justice begins, the damage is already done. This is why we must talk about justice reform. Our legal frameworks were not built for a world where violence can be shared instantly with thousands of people, where evidence disappears, reappears, and migrates across platforms in seconds, where perpetrators are not individuals but networks. We need reforms that recognize that digital violence is real violence, that consent must be central to all image sharing laws, that platforms must be held legally accountable for inaction, and most importantly, that victims should not carry the burden of seeking justice alone. Justice systems must become proactive, not reactive. But legal reform is not enough, because what this case exposes is something even deeper, a culture where women are still seen as possessions, where lack of consent is not a boundary but a thrill, where violence is normalized, joked about, even celebrated. And here lies the greatest challenge to justice. You cannot enforce your way out of a culture that tolerates abuse. That's why access to justice must also mean access to education, awareness, and prevention. We need to teach respect, consent, and digital responsibility from an early age. We need to create environments where speaking up is supported, not punished. And we need men, not just as bystanders, but as active participants in dismantling this culture. Because behind every anonymous profile is not a monster. It is often an ordinary person. And that is what makes this problem so urgent. So let us return to the number 32,000. 32,000 people in one group. But it is not an isolated case. It is a symptom of something larger, something systemic. If justice only arrives after public outrage, if law exists but are not enforced, if victims are silenced while perpetrators regroup, then we must ask ourselves, do we truly have access to justice? Or do we simply have the illusion of it? Real justice means swift action, not delayed reaction. Protection that works in practice, not just on paper. Systems that prioritize victims, not procedures. And a culture that refuses to tolerate violence in any form, online or offline. The digital world is not separate from reality. It is an extension of it. And if we fail to ensure justice there, we fail to ensure justice anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for your ideas with respect to that how justice systems must be proactive, not reactive. And when we talk about law, a lot of times there are these complexities that it becomes really very challenging for any victim, for any survivor to actually look into how is it that they are going to access any such provisions if they decide to fight against the system. What are the ways and where is the support available? And rightly said that, okay, it's not just about what's happening in our real life, but also what is happening in our digital life as well, because that is an extension of our reality. So we need to be able to look into that, okay, how those also are moderated, regulated, and it goes beyond just the idea of awareness. And you have also mentioned that, okay, the legal frameworks were built for a world that has moved beyond that. And that aptly talks about what is happening in the digital world at the moment, when we talk about regulation, where does that regulation exist? Are social media companies or whether respective countries and justice systems are supposed to look into it. And that is a very slow legislation that is very slow legislature that is into making. So thank you so much for your insights as to what actually is one of the problems, what happens when we look into legislation and justice reforms.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let's move towards the next speaker. We have spoken today about systems and about what they protect, who they serve, and who they leave behind. Our next speaker knows the distance between a system and a life more intimately than most, and she turned that knowledge into something extraordinary. Petrina Montrose is a survivor leader, a mentor in gender-based violence with women Ascension, and a participant in the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN Women UK. She has spent over 6 years working with the criminal justice system, mentoring high-risk and medium-risk service users through rehabilitation and reintegration, presenting complex cases to fellow practitioners, and contributing to academic research on early childhood risk factor for antisocial behavior. She has served as an expert on the Experience Review Panel for Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Center at the British Institute of International and Comparative Law, bringing to that table something no academic credential alone can provide: the authority of a lived experience. Petrina's life work is built on a conviction she carries with absolute clarity that survivors' voice do not just belong in policy conversations. They are the most essential voice in them, because no one understands what a system failed to do better than the person that system failed. She does not come to this stage to be defined by what was done to her. She comes as an expert, an advocate, an aspiring forensic psychologist, and a woman who has chosen, with full deliberation, to transform her experience into a force of change that reaches far beyond her own story. There is a line she carries in her work from the scholar Annie Fukushima that I want to leave with you before she speaks. Regardless of the choices that lead to exploitation, no one chooses to be exploited. Please join me in welcoming Petrina Montrose.
Hello. Oh, hi, everybody. Please excuse the way that I'm speaking. I'm recovering from having a sore throat, so I sound a little bit strange. But it's an honor to be here, and thank you for such a lovely, warm welcome. Firstly, can you see my slides? Everything
Yes, we
good?
can see them.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I may be going a little bit slower today than normal because of my throat, so bear with me. It's an honor to be here. So my name is Petrina. As you've the lovely, wonderful, warm introduction, I am also a survivor. I was sold by women. I'm a survivor of sex trafficking. I was sold as a child to the billionaires and the elite of the world who believed that their wealth purchased impunity. I was a minor, homeless, and without any education. And this is where I stayed psychologically and economically entrapped for over a decade. And it took me 15 years. So we're talking about the long-term pervasive effects of chronic trauma. It took me 15 years to educate myself enough to stand before you now today, but not as a victim, but as evidence that the system has failed and as the architect of what must come next. It is the lived architecture of my childhood. But before I begin as a survivor, my goal is not to rewrite victims' stories, but to share a perspective rooted in empowerment and the belief in transformative change. My personal journey, marked by adversity, highlights a broader societal issue where current policies and laws often fail to address the complex realities in justice reform and legal enforcement. So I'm talking today from a survivor-focused justice perspective, and I wanted to begin with the scale of the documented failure. So research suggests that 49.6 million people are living in modern slavery on any given day. 6.3 million are trapped in forced commercial sexual exploitation, and women and girls represent 99% of those trafficked. The estimated annual profit from sex trafficking is 99 billion, but the statistic today that I want to bring to your attention is that 0.04%, not because survivors do not exist, have ever been identified by official systems. Because systems are not designed to find us, they're not designed to believe us, and they're not designed to protect us. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and Global Report on Trafficking in Persons documents that conviction rates for trafficking offences remain critically low across all regions. And for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, fewer than 1 in 100,000 trafficking cases result in a conviction. Even in high-income countries with dedicated anti-trafficking legislation, prosecution rates have stagnated or declined. Elite perpetrators are identified in fewer than 3% of prosecuted cases. But a quote I want to leave you with is something that I would like to embed and imprint, is that it's so beautifully depicts that it's very tempting to take the side of the perpetrator. What does that look like? Well, all the perpetrator asks is that the bystander does nothing. He appeals to the universal desire to see, hear, and speak no evil. Now, the architecture of legal impunity that I am talking about, and I was bought, the men who bought me were protected by their class, their connections, their legal teams, and a justice system that was never designed with me in mind. But let's look at the architecture of legal impunity, because impunity for perpetrators is not incidental. I would argue that it's structurally engineered. And when we look at one of the most cited studies empirically, we see that 855 survivors across 9 countries, 92% state they want to exit. 68% met full diagnostic criteria for PTSD, chronic PTSD. This was comparable to rates found in combat veterans and survivors of state-sponsored torture. 71% have been physically assaulted and 63% have been raped. Survivors consistently identify legal systems as barriers rather than pathways. But when we talk about justice reform in cases of violence against women and girls, we are often talking about sometimes training more police officers or updating guidelines or creating new task forces. But if the law itself was built by people who did not include us, did not believe us, and did not design it to protect us, then I would argue that improving how we deliver that same law changes nothing fundamentally. The men who purchased me were protected, as I said, not because individual officers or judges made bad decisions. They were protected because the legal system is architecturally designed to treat wealth, status, and power as credibility, to treat survivors like me as unreliable, complicit, or invisible. Reforming justice without interrogating that architecture is like painting the walls of a building whose foundations were never built to hold us. It looks like progress from the outside, but survivors are still falling through the floor. So we need not a better version of the system that failed us. We need a legal system rebuilt from its foundations, designed by the people it was supposed to protect, and structurally incapable of placing the interests of powerful perpetrators above the lives of women and children they exploited. So what can we do? Well, ending impunity requires a non-criminalization of survivors. It's absolutely unconditional and not subject to prosecutorial discretion, because criminalizing survivors while perpetrators walk free is the legal embodiment of impunity. We need mandatory intersectional data collection, which is what I really want to do with my PhD that I'm writing a proposal for, because disaggregated data by race, class, gender, and age and immigration status, impunity hides in aggregate statistics and only becomes legally actionable when it is made visible. And we need independent survivor-led monitoring bodies with binding enforcement powers, because impunity thrives in the absence of accountable oversight. One of my favorite, Byron Stevenson, whose work in this space between legal theory and human consequences gives us the demand that defines this moment. And I'd like to leave you with this, that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. Now, when we look at these different areas, I'd like to draw to your attention, if you just bear with me because my throat, the affordable legal aid, fair courts, and survivor-centered systems. So what does this mean? When we looked at some of the research, it found that survivors with legal representation were 4.7 times more likely to achieve favorable outcomes, yet 12% of identified survivors in the United States received any legal aid. And without representation, survivors were significantly more likely to be criminalized, as I've said, for offenses they committed as a direct result of being trafficked. The Walk Free Global Slavery Index in 2023 found that 97 countries have no legal aid provision for trafficking survivors, and the UK Legal Aid Act 2012 removed civil legal aid eligibility, directly removing survivors' access to justice. When one of my favorite people, Judith Herman, names what this absence of legal support does to a survivor. When the survivor is not believed, when her testimony is distorted or discredited, the effect on her is catastrophic. The refusal to bear witness in itself is a form of violence. So what do we need? From a survivor's perspective, from my perspective, here is what justice reform in legal aid and court systems must deliver. We need universal, unconditional legal aid for every trafficking survivor, funded as essential public infrastructure and not discretionary charity. We need courts that are trauma-informed, where judges hold mandatory certified training in trauma responses, where a survivor's silence, inconsistency, or delayed disclosure is understood as evidence of trauma, not evidence of lying. We need survivors in positions of binding authority over legal aid policy and court reform, not as consultants, not as advisors, but as decision makers. Because another quote, the survivor needs to tell her story in a way that is believed and understood. Without this communal act, I would argue in support of the evidence that is unsubstantiated, that recovery cannot occur. Now, when we look at this in a little bit of a broader context, we can look at transformative justice, which I believe is essential in violence against women and girls, legal reform, because punishment alone, as we can see, has not worked. The evidence is unequivocal. Decades of punitive criminal justice responses to violence against women and girls have not reduced its prevalence. In fact, research demonstrates that attrition rate in rape cases in England and Wales was over 94%, meaning fewer than 6 in 100 reported rapes reached any forms of legal resolution for the survivor. That figure has not meaningfully improved in the 20 years since research was done. There was a report by Baroness Vivienne Stern, who was commissioned by the Home Office, found that the criminal justice system's response to rape was causing survivors active harm through the process of seeking justice, and recommended a fundamental reorientation towards survivor needs rather than prosecution outcomes alone. When we take this into consideration, the ordinary human response to atrocities to banish them from consciousness, in the words of Judith Herman, but the survivor who is being silenced by shame, disbelief, and fear needs something the criminal justice system was not designed to provide. She needs her experience to be witnessed and validated. A justice system focused primarily on prosecution rather than survivor validation, I would argue their safety and their recovery is not designed in the people that it claims to serve. We need to recognize, importantly, that poverty, homelessness, educational exclusion, and lack of legal status are not background factors in violence against women and girls. They are structural risk factors that must be addressed in law. Building legal responses that address the pattern of control rather than isolated incidences, creating legal remedies alongside criminal ones so survivors do not have to choose between their safety and their justice, and mandating economic independence support as part of a legal justice response because financial dependency is one of the most significant barriers to leaving violence. So I would like to say the conventional justice system asks me one question: can we prosecute? Transformative justice asks something fundamentally different. What conditions made this harm possible? And how do we dismantle every single one of them so it cannot happen again? For survivors of violence against women and girls, that difference is not philosophical, theoretical. It is the difference between a system that processes our trauma and a system that prevents it. And lastly, I want to leave you with the struggle to rehabilitate and why justice reform cannot wait. And I want to be honest with you, my friends, because what rehabilitation actually looks like. Because it's not a program, it's not a pathway, and it's not a linear journey towards recovery that policy documents describe with clean arrows and optimistic timelines. Rehabilitation for me meant carrying decades of trauma through every single room I tried to build a life inside. It meant raising 6 children while silently dismantling the psychological architecture that trafficking had constructed in me. It meant teaching myself to read, to write, and think, and argue, and research in the years that other people spent in universities. It meant learning to trust people, to trust institutions that had given me every reason to and not to, and it meant doing all of that without legal acknowledgement, without reparation, without a single court ever telling me what was done to me was wrong, and the men who did it would face consequence. Judith Herman tells us that recovery can take place only within the context of relationships, my friends. It cannot occur in isolation, and yet the system offered me isolation, dressed as independence, silence dressed as moving on, and survival dressed as success, when what I needed, what every survivor needs, every victim needs, is a legal system that says loudly and enforceably that our lives had value before we learned to prove it. Justice reform is not important to me because of what happened in the past. It is urgent to me because of what is happening right now to the child who is where I was as a minor, as a young girl, a child who was waiting for a system to see me and who cannot wait another 26 years for the law to decide that she matters. A heartfelt thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Petrina, for such an insightful and a powerful talk about your lived experience and how you have used it to question the very systems that, as you said, protect people who are part of that system. You've talked about that, okay, how the legal system treats wealth and status as credibility, and victims as somebody who have to be questioned because of what has happened to them. And your idea of transformative justice, that, okay, it needs to be designed by people who have actually been through that, okay, why is it that has happened? That why is important. And what is it that we can do to ensure that none of that happens to anybody else? Thank you so much for your insights, as that helps us see that, okay, how everything is structural. But as one of the speakers has talked about earlier, if violence is structural, so should our response be. And you have talked about it, that, okay, how that structural response can take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And may I just say to every survivor in this world who has carried what should have been carried by the law, you were never the problem, you were never the failure, and you were never invisible. You were simply living inside a system that was deliberately built to look away from you. And everything you have survived is not a measure of your weakness, but evidence of a legal system that must now be held to account. And I'm really looking forward to working with policy and working with all of you of how we can implement that and how we can be held to account for every year it made us survivors carry alone what justice should have carried for us. So I'm all in 100%.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now let's move on to our next speaker. Behind every conversation about power is a question that really gets asked directly. Who gets to speak, who gets heard, and who decides which voices carry weight in the room? Our next speaker has spent over 30 years sitting with precisely that question and building something out of the answer. Laura Dragomir is a business communication strategist, a speaker, moderator, and a founder of Powerful Communication. Her work brings together strategic communication, executive presence, and a study of influence with a particular focus on how communication can reinforce power, create silence, build credibility, or drive change. She understands that how something is said is really separate from whether it is believed. And that is this dynamic that shapes not just professional outcomes, but the culture of entire organizations and societies. Nora holds a conviction worth sitting with that the quality of communication is not just a professional skill, it is a moral one. And because the standard of society is willing to uphold are in no small part determined by who chooses to listen to. 30 years of working at the intersection of voice, behavior, and human dynamics has given her a perspective that is precise, socially intelligent, and deeply attuned to what is actually happening beneath the surface of any exchange. We are grateful that perspective is in this room today. Please join me in welcoming Laura.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm truly sorry I missed the message to use the conference background in my presentation. You are very kind. Thank you very much. So thank you for bringing us together in a conversation that should never remain symbolic. I am from Romania. Romania is a country in the eastern of Europe. This is very important because I live in a country who is protected by law, and yet too often are not defended in time by the law as we want to be. Yeah. Okay, stop share, and I'm here. This year, Romania adopted a new law on preventing and combating femicide. That matters. Naming a crime clearly matters, but this step came late. And when justice came late, protection came late too, often after women and girls have already paid the price of that delay. And this is very important because a protection order can place a legal boundary between a victim and her aggressor, but no legal document by itself can restrain the violence of a man who has not been stopped in time. A law is not protection simply because it exists. Protection begins only when institutions recognize danger early, respond seriously, and act without bias. And this is the perspective that I want to bring today. For me, violence against women and girls is not only a legal issue. It is also an issue of credibility, of public voice, and institutional response, because long before many women are silenced by force, they are diminished by social reflex, dubbed in advance, and left to prove a danger that should already have been taken seriously. And in that gap between warning and response, between disclosure and action, violence grows. One of the reasons that gap remains so dangerous is that victims are often believed only after the evidence has become overwhelming. Too often, the first response they meet is not protection, but suspicion, not urgency, but hesitation, not trust, but the expectation that they must prove in perfect detail and perfect composure what should already have triggered concern. And I want to say that a system that believes late will also protect late. So I want to show you some figures. So in Romania, so violence, it's a lot of person experience violence, a lot of women experience violence, physical or sexual, since age 15. 26% reported physical violence by an intimate partner. 139 domestic violence intervention in 2025, but that official figures never show and show full scale. So it's very important to know that that figures on the screen are official, they matter, but they do not tell the whole story. Official data only capture the violence that reach the system, but that official not capture the cases that remain unreported because women are afraid, ashamed, economically depend, or unwilling to expose themselves to public judgment and institutional distrust. So across Europe and indeed across the world, violence against women remains widely underreported, and Romania is not an exception. So that numbers describe the part of reality that became visible enough to be counted. A society that waits for visible damage before it acts is like a house that ignores the smell of smoke until the flames reach the roof. At that point, what follows is not prevention, it's only aftermath. And when we speak about girls, the pictures become even more urgent. For many girls, risk begins long before a case reaches the courtroom, in poverty, in silence, in dependency, in normalized abuse, and in the absence of timely intervention. So I have also few numbers about girls in Romania. So here, so 600 births to girls under 15 in 2024. Risk begins long before a case is named. Harm also grows when silence replaces the protection. So what is very, very important to mention is when we speak about justice, we cannot speak only about punishment after the fact. We also have to speak about recognition before the fact. And sometimes what fails them is not only the law or the institution, it's also, and I insist on this, it's also the community around them, the people who notice enough to worry, sense that something is wrong, and still look away. In a global conversation like this, we know that elsewhere the scale of violence may be even harsher, even more visible, and even more devastating. But no life should have to compete for moral urgency. This is why, for me, ending violence against women and girls require three things. So, first of all, I want to say that it's important that law is not protection until it is implemented in time. This is very important. Second, violence grows in the gap between warning and response. And to not forget that women and girls should not have to prove perfect victimhood in order to be protected. So, too often systems expect perfectly evidence, as I told you, perfect timing, perfect composure, and the perfect articulated plea for help, but fear is rarely orderly. Trauma is rarely eloquent, and danger does not wait for institutional comfort. This is why I truly believe, a survivor-centered system must also be a seriousness-centered system. It must know how to listen when the story is incomplete. It must know how to act before the final headline, and it must understand that every delay, every minimization, every biased interpretation can become part of the chain that made the violence possible. Because justice does not begin only when a case reaches the courtroom. It begins much earlier. A woman or a girl signals risk at the moment risk is signaled, and the system decides whether to hear in time. A law can name a crime, but preventing the next one requires more than law. It requires institutions that act, communities that do not look away, and a public voice strong enough to make indifference unacceptable. So, at the final, and because I close, I would like to leave us with three convictions. First, justice fails when danger is recognized too late. Second, protection is not measured by what the law promises, but by what systems, communities, and people are willing to do in time. And third, progress is never abstract. It lives in every woman believed sooner, every girl protected earlier, and every risk interrupted before it becomes irreversible. Thank you, the organizers, for creating this important global space, and to my fellow speakers for deep courage and clarity they have brought to this conversation. And I want to tell you something. I know violence against women and girls will not disappear simply because we condemned it. But every serious effort matters through education, through stronger communities, through shifting social reflexes, and through legal systems that act with greater consistency, fairness, and resolve. And I would also like to acknowledge the women to continue to stand up for women, often with strength, persistence, and the moral clarity that institutions themselves still struggle to match. That work matters, the world still needs more of it, and for sure, it must continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for building on to what our previous speaker, Petrina, talked about. That, okay, how our justice systems need to be developed more from the perspective of people who have faced it. And then you've also talked about it aptly, that there needs to be survivor-centered system, that it must know how to act. And trauma is rarely eloquent, and we are always expecting this perfect survivor. There's this checklist that everybody who goes to the system talks about the issues, talks about what has happened to them, is there. And we need to move beyond that. And the idea that our work, regardless of how small it is, matters, because it is one voice that that can raise that awareness about and then lead to that action. Thank you so much, Laura. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker. We have spent a great deal of time talking about changing the systems around us, questioning the systems. But some of the most consequential change happens inside organization, in the policies and cultures that shape how people are hired, developed, heard, and valued every single day. Our next speaker has spent a decade doing exactly that. Abimbola Agboola is a certified human resource professional based in United Kingdom with nearly 10 years of progressive experience across consulting and industry sectors. Her expertise spans performance management, talent development, and learning and development. And her particular gift lies in something that is harder than it sounds, aligning people, processes, and cultures so they generally work together rather than against each other. Abimbola understands that an organization's values are not what is written on its wall, they are what happens in the room. And she has dedicated her career to making those two things match. Beyond her professional life, she's a published author of 2 books, a public speaker, and an active volunteer, someone whom the commitment to growth and continuous learning is not a professional posture, but a way of being the world. Please join me in welcoming Abimbola.
Thank you very much, Sanaa. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. I'm super excited to be doing this. I'll just share my slide. Okay. Please confirm that you can see my slide.
We can see that now.
Thank you. All right. So there's been a lot that has been shared by other speakers, and I'm super excited to be joining in the conversation for this. Thank you to all the speakers that have spoken ahead, that set the context around this. The key thing that I'll be touching on about ending violence against women today will be around the prevention and ensuring that there is a real change. So a lot has been said or a lot is actually happening in the global world, as it were, around this topic, from professionals in the industry to religious organizations, to the family, from people that went in for the end of the year party in an organization and just ate, drank, and ended up meeting themselves in an hotel room, not understanding how they got there. Then, reporting and the police are doing more to the trauma because the individual is a well-known personality in the organization and nothing being done about that. To a married woman that is continuously being beaten by her husband, and then reports or complaints about this to the person she sees as a religious leader, and the religious leader shares that, divorce is not, God hates divorce, and the person and the woman is advised to continually pray for the husband, and nothing is being done, which actually led to the death of that woman. A lot has actually been happening, but what exactly needs to be done? The key thing that I'll say is laws are actually in place, but is it really being implemented? And is it being implemented all right? What actually needs to be done? And the key thing is about taking action, not really just ensuring that those laws are in place, but are they really being implemented? This leads me to talk about the quote by Ban Ki-moon that says, there is one universal truth applicable to all countries, cultures, and communities. Violence against women is never acceptable and never excusable, never tolerable. We cannot excuse the fact that violence is actually happening to women and girls, but should this actually continue? Should this be tolerated? Of course, this should not be. But the global reality is that 1 in 3 women globally experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. From you being in a board meeting and you've seen someone taking advantage, or you have a hand on your leg from a male counterpart to a female counterpart, and you not being able to speak, probably in a boardroom in a board meeting, a lot is actually happening and nothing being done because the individual is the head of the department who owns your promotion and what have you. Most violence is committed by someone to the victim. Also, many survivors never report abuse due to fear, shame, or because of distrust of the system. And violence harms health, education, employment, families, and national economies. And even when you report, really, what would happen to that individual? Is there a lot of victim blaming? Is there really the law enforcers are expected to protect the individuals? Are there things being added to those individuals' trauma? And the real thing is that justice often feels too expensive, too slow. When you report, sometimes nothing is being done about it. Sometimes it's too confusing because you do not even know if the case is going forward or not, or it's even too traumatic from you reporting and you even asking yourself, why did you report to the police? Because they're asking you questions. What clothes did you wear? Did you go on a single girl's night out? Was it at night you were walking? Were you walking alone? There were just a lot of questions that had to the individual's trauma. And to solve this, justice should be free, or there should be free or low-cost legal aid for survivors. We should also fast-track domestic violence and assault cases. It shouldn't be that the case will go on for years and nothing is actually being done about it. Also, the police should also be informed, should also go through a course on trauma, on how to handle trauma for victims. And there should also be safe reporting channels online and in person for the individuals, whereby there's an easy access to reach out to probably a body on on creating the easiest access for you to make the reports. And protection orders should also be enforced quickly, because even when you report, what actually happens to the perpetrator? Will anything be done to that particular individual? I've had cases of a top religious leader that abused a particular lady and nothing was actually done. Even after the lady complained or reported, it was just swept under the carpet. There was a lot of headline about it for weeks, for months, and nothing eventually happened. And one thing I'll say is laws must cover domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, both offline and online, forced marriage, child marriage, human trafficking, economic abuse, and stalking and digital abuse, because there's a lot also going on in the electronic sector as well. And one thing I'd like to point out is that having laws is not enough. It actually has to work in real life. It's really about the implementation about those laws. And sometimes the gaps here is the police refuse complaints because they ask you what clothes were you wearing, and then sometimes there's a lot of victim blaming, whereby you are the one that is accused of, you should have walked late at night by 7 p.m. You shouldn't have gone around that area. And then those particular individuals are left to blame themselves, and that overall, in fact, impacts their own mental health. There's also a lot of delay in court, whereby you now ask yourself, why did I now make that, why did I really go ahead with this? Because nothing is being done. There's just a lot of postponement. I talked about victim blaming. There's a lot of corruption in the system, a lot of bias against women that are poor or do not have access to privilege, or migrant women, or minorities, rural women, disabled women. But what really should work is that there should be a lot of gender sensitivity training. There should be, in fact, there should be funding shelters and survival services. Even in some countries, I know this is really in place, but we could also increase more of that. There should also be a lot of community legal awareness campaigns and a lot of public reporting of justice outcomes of those outcomes of whatever thing that was reported. There should consistently be public reporting of what happened to the perpetrator in the tail end. And one thing I'll say is that prevention starts before the violence. We can stop this before it even starts. And this part starts from, the small units of the family. Both young boys and girls should be taught teaching respect and consent early, and also to the boy child should also be taught how to gaining consent before proceeding, because it's from a young mind that this would actually impact an adult, because it's from a boy that you grow to a man. And so it's important that there's a lot of respect that is taught from a young age, and there should be consent to also to be emphasized. Then men and boys should also be engaged as allies, even in this prevention, even in this conversation about prevention of violence against women. Boy child should also be involved in being in engaging around this conversations. And then the workplaces should also be safe in in that there should be policies around sexual harassment. And it's not just about the sexual harassment policies being in place, but also it should be implemented. And the key thing I'm talking about is ensuring that actions are really being taken against perpetrators, whereby the fact that it's the CEO that perpetrated something, the legal system should still be able to take those individuals into accountability or whatever that was done, because no one should be above the law. And there should also be improved economic opportunities for women, because women that are empowered will be able to use their voices in situations like this. So what must we do now? We should set time limits for violence cases in courts. There should be phone shelters and crisis hotlines. We should also train justice officials around handling trauma, handling victims, and also traumas of these particular individuals. We should also include men and boy child in these prevention campaigns, because it's not just the woman that is in the world or the girl child that is in the world, but how this happens to those girl child is also perpetrated by some boy child. So they should also be included in the prevention campaign. And women should also be protected online and offline. And what I'll say to conclude is that ending violence against women and girls is actually possible. It's not a dream, it's a decision. And it's for us to actually take action and not just keep having conversation about it, but really take action and ensure that laws really work in our organizations or in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Abimbola, for sharing your insights about what happens within the legal system and why is it that prevention starts before violence. And there needs to be more economic opportunities for women to so that they are independent and they are able to move towards other things as well. A lot of what the speakers have talked about today have a lot of correlations with respect to structural issues, with respect to, and it's not just a community issue, it is a global issue with respect to whether we are talking about the global north or whether we are talking about the global south. So it means that when a global issue has been raised, there needs to be more of a global action, not just within the communities, and it needs to move beyond just talking about one policy, because yes, we do have policies, we do have laws, but as shared by our speakers, that those laws and those legislations do not end up actually protecting or in any way serving the survivors or people who talk about or who raise their voice. So these are some of the aspects that need to be looked at. Now, there are a few questions that have been asked, and I think so I'm going to just raise two questions from our speakers, and any of our speakers can answer those. Now, the first question is that how does violence impact the economy and the society? Because we have talked about the structural aspects, but in what way can its impact be seen in economy and in the society? Which one of our speaker would like to go ahead and share how this ends up happening? if we have, I think so we have Cordelia and Petrina is here. If they would like to take on this question. How do you think? What are the other questions and what are the other insights that all of you are taking from today that you would like to maybe either think about it, reflect on it? Cordelia, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, thank you. I would say we lose a lot of our talent to motherhood because when women they leave the workforce, right? Because they have children, but when they want to re-enter, they're not able to re-enter at the same level. And so women are the biggest consumers also, ironically. So it's like the less money, the less disposable income we have, the less money circulating in the economy, And so, and also there's more debt because a lot of women get advanced degrees, but then they're never able to really use them. So those are some of the ways.
Yeah, you're right about that because again, there is, regardless of which country we're talking about, there is this pay gap issue. And then we have looked into it. There are studies that talk about it. And especially when you come back from maternity leave, from a gap, your ability or your skills are questioned. And there are a lot of barriers also with respect to when you talk about promotion, when you talk about any of the other, even upskilling opportunities, that it is not easy. You have to look at so many factors. For example, if you're a mother who's going to take care of the kids, if you are if you're a caretaker who's going to take care of somebody else, or maybe your parents in the family, and you want to get educated, where are the finances or where is it that opportunity is going to come from? So there is a cost to everything, and that needs to be looked into, studied, and questioned as well. We are questioning it. But when it happens more at a broader level, a lot of times we are gaslit into thinking about that, okay, these are the issues that don't matter because there are other broader issues that need to be looked at. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cordelia.
I just want to bring one more point into it because like a lot of times women, if they do re-enter, they may have to start in another field. Like they're starting their career again at like 40 or 50, And even though I saw something in the comments, you learn a lot of skills from motherhood. So you're not coming in a new field with absolutely nothing because motherhood really promotes understanding the psychology of how humans think, how they develop, right? And your ability to come in at leadership levels are much higher. So it's not a complete deficit. It's just that we have to inculcate women looking at it as, I'm not just coming home. I'm not just coming back from being home for 20 years. I'm coming in with 20 years of leadership, on top of my previous career. So this is my third career.
Yeah, so this is so important. And at times, what is being done at the home, and when we say that, okay, I'm a stay-at-home mom or I am a stay-at-home parent, that in a way this values what a lot of the multiple skills and the brain that is working at 110%, looking at schedules, looking at learning, looking at so many things that are ongoing. So you're right about that a lot of times that is not looked into because that is not considered as formal experience. That is considered as, oh, that's part of your job. That's part of who you are. That's part of, okay, this is what women are supposed to do. So that is something that needs to be maybe formalized or maybe talked about a little bit more, that, okay, it's not just, there is skill that goes into managing all of that. And it's not just about, it's not the nature nurture element that is ongoing. So Miss Petrina also wanted to answer the same question. And that is the question that I asked was that how does violence impact the economy and the society? So if there's a certain insight that you would like to share, we would love to hear that in what way that ends up happening. Because you talked about the justice system and you have shared that, okay, what ends up happening. So in what way is justice, the economy, and the society working together to working together to that end?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Okay, well, let's have a think. I think one thing when I was researching and I was looking at something that the global focus on violence against women and girls has shifted towards a more like a coordinated whole system approach where economic policy and justice reform work together. I mean, I always tend to answer things. It acknowledges basically the physical safety is impossible without economic autonomy, which is what I would say from a survivor and somebody that spent a long time educating myself. And economic growth is stifled by violence. So I think they're two very distinct differences. But domestic abuse and sexual violence they cost the global economy something like 1.5 trillion. And in England and Wales, when I was looking at research for this suggests that the lifetime cost of sexual violence alone exceeds 400 billion. We put that into context and that we don't have rehabilitation and ways that we can help women to reclaim their sense of self through education. What enabled me as a mother of 6 children, I study all night because for me it was my destiny was not one of sexual servitude, and this was not how my life story was going to be written. So I had a very high level of intrinsic motivation. And the systems are there I would like to say that the systems are there to help you. We mustn't disempower ourselves. I believe that everything is possible, and it's only the limitations that we put upon ourselves. With the right support, everything is possible. We can't do it for somebody else. They have to want to do it. But the power of language and where we position others and how one single belief incrementally can set a whole cascade of positive responses of rehabilitating somebody. So it took me a very long time, but I think advocating for ethical survivor inclusion is very important so that we don't vicariously re-traumatize others or re-traumatize ourselves or re-victimize others. So we need to take a very powerful stance in how we help and support people. I would argue from the work that I do and that we need very powerful mentors and people. It's very, very easy to intellectualize this, but actually we need people that are going to stand there and work tirelessly and believe in somebody and be there and follow through. So I don't know if that answered the question because I went to go and get a drink for my throat. So I don't know if I missed it all. I have this terrible habit of doing this, of never answering the question.
No, thank you so much. You have talked about that, okay, in what way that, okay, it's impacting the economy, because with the other questions that, okay, what we are supposed to do, what the countries are supposed to do, in what way the law isn't working out. So that I felt that a lot of our presentations and a lot of our speakers had covered, and this is that, okay, the impact on economy and impact on the society. How is that happening? And then you've answered that, okay, what the economic cost of that? What's the individual cost of something like that? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Oh yeah, I think so. Buhle also wants to add in. Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so the question was, how does gender-based violence affect the economy, right?
Yes.
I think this is something one of the speakers also highlighted, right? Is that with obviously gender-based violence, there tends to be, a reduction when it comes to productivity, right? So someone who experiences gender-based violence at home is less likely to go to work the next day, right? Because the bruises would most likely be on the face. So they struggle to perform due to some of these physical injuries as well as emotional trauma. And I think another important thing to highlight is just like how government responds to this issue, right? So an increase in gender-based violence is most likely to also lead to government allocating more resources, right, to healthcare systems, as well as sort of strengthening their policing, as well as legal services. Instead of just like other developments within the country. So the focus then becomes, okay, let's increase our police services, let's increase or let's strengthen the healthcare system. So money ends up being spent on those things, whereas there's definitely a lot more other things that could be focused on, such as increasing unemployment. So instead of increasing employment opportunities, we have government now focusing on, mitigating the issues that arise from gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Buhle. And you're right that, okay, most of the time, resources related to this aspect may not be allocated because the governments would be more interested in allocating them to more of a developmental projects which can be photographed well, which can talk about metrics, which can talk about statistics. And this is something that will take time to materialize, to get into statistics, to see the impact for. I think that Cynthia also wants to add in her point. Yes, Cynthia, please go ahead.
All right, I think just to add to what the other speakers have said, and they expressed themselves beautifully about how it impacts the economy. I think society and generally it creates a handicapped society, and it makes women want to shy away from especially the business world. If we look at the landscape today, there are so many businesses for basic things such as bras, a bra that a woman wears, an underwear that a woman wears, sanitary pads which are owned by men who've never worn these things. They don't know these things. So the more gender-based violence against females persists, the more women shy away from owning businesses, the more they shy away from getting into some of these important aspects of society where they are needed. Because for something like healthcare, there's been this debate on whether men should be gynecologists or not. But I think if we had more women knowing the struggles that we women go through in the health sector with male gynecologists, many more women would venture into that if they are not shamed by society and looked down on. Because when you have some of these rampant things, women become scared of the workforce. They don't want to, there are some countries where women cannot buy a land without taking permission or having a signatory from their husband. There are countries where women cannot vote. So when we do this, we have a society that is handicapped and which is most of the important positions are filled out by men, and women are absent. So I think it goes really deep into society and economy, and especially into the government's pockets when women are not involved. Because if you have a woman who is traumatized at home, who constantly faces all sorts of tribulations from her community, the chances that she feels confident are very low. We have a society where women are not confident, they cannot speak up, and confidence is intrinsically linked to speaking up. It's only when you're confident in yourself that you can go out and tell your story. If a woman says, okay, makeup brand, I've seen this issue, there's clothes made for women, they're so tight around the chest area. Those are little things that only a woman knows. How jeans can fit us perfectly, how baby carriers go. So we need more women in businesses. And how we do this is by empowering these women to know their rights and rise above this trauma. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And that was such an important point that, okay, we need to bring in more women to business who know actually what the issues are, What is it? What's a problem that they can solve? What is the solution that they can provide? So in a way, not only are they empowered, but they in a way also empower their own communities. That goes beyond their household. That goes beyond that, okay, how one person when empowered changes things. Now, this brings me towards the closing of today's session. And before we close, let's just stop for one moment and sit with what has been said in this session today in this conference. What you heard actually was not just a panel, it was a collection of lives shaped by struggle and conviction, giving you something. The question is what you will do with it. There have been amazing ideas, insights, questions that have been raised. What needs to be done? What are we going to do about that? Awareness, as one of our speakers talked about, is not enough. Knowing something is wrong and doing nothing is also a part of complicity. We have the reports, the data, the declarations. What has been missing is not information. It is the willingness to act. Violence is not only what we see, it is also what we excuse. The comment we let pass, the silence we keep because speaking up feels too costly. And it is costly. Speaking up takes extraordinary courage. Every person who has ever done it deserves our respect and our action. And moreover, as Buhle talked about, that if violence is structural, our response must be too. Individual courage matters, but it's not a substitute for systematic change. And legal systems in too many places are not designed to support the survivor. It is not a flaw, it is actually a design. And designs can be changed, may take time. But I think so the first step needs to be taken. We must redefine what we normalize. And normal is not neutral. And what have we been normalizing that we no longer will? This is also a question that all of us need to reflect on. This session asks all of us, from all of us, just one thing. One conversation, one injustice named, one person championed, one silence broken. Justice does not require a lot of times grand gestures. It requires honest ones, small, consistent, courageous, from enough people that the weight of those choices becomes impossible to ignore. That is how normal changes. Today, the theme was justice. Yesterday, it was right. And this conference isn't finished yet. Tomorrow, we talk about action, because without it, things remain incomplete. Come back for that conversation. Bring the discomfort, the clarity, the name of someone whose voice belongs in a room like this. On behalf of Women Extension and their amazing team, Ms. Maheen, Tahmina, Kanvi, Amal, Jannat, and the rest of the amazing audience members who brought in those insightful questions, powerful conversations from our speakers. Thank you so much. And for listening, for being willing to let this conversation matter. We'll see you for what comes next. Take care, everyone, and see you guys soon.